Have you ever imagined walking into a store to buy something simple and being treated with contempt just because of your appearance? Now, think about this happening to the daughter of one of the biggest icons in world sports. Jasmine Jordan, heir to one of the most legendary names in basketball, went through a humiliating moment that no one could have predicted. But what happened next left everyone speechless. Racism is still present in places where we least expect it, and this story proves exactly that. Jasmine, who grew up surrounded by her father's legacy, entered the store just to buy sneakers, without fuss, without ostentation. But as soon as he stepped into the establishment, he noticed crooked looks, discreet murmurs, and cold service. At first, she thought it might just be a misunderstanding, maybe a bad day for the employee. But as time passed, it became more and more evident she was being ignored. And now I ask you, how many times have you seen or heard of something like this happening? How many people go through similar situations every day and are simply forced to accept it? Prejudice may be disguised in small attitudes, but the pain and humiliation are real. Jasmine, who grew up hearing stories of her father's overcoming and struggle, knew that wasn't right. But what she didn't imagine was the twist this story would have. The store employee, without even knowing who the young woman was there, continued to treat Jasmine with disdain, as if she wasn't worth her time or attention. Meanwhile, other customers entered and were greeted with smiles and completely different service. Jasmine could have left quietly. She could have simply ignored him. But at that moment, she decided she wasn't going to let this go. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and made a call. In a few minutes, everything would change. Because on the other end of the line, there was Michael Jordan. And if there's one thing the whole world knows about him, it's that he doesn't tolerate injustice. What happened after that call was something that no one expected, and it made this story one of the most memorable moments of his life. Jasmine Jordan entered the store without fanfare, without security, just wanting to choose a pair of sneakers. For anyone else, this would be simple, routine, but for her, that moment would turn into a humiliating experience. As soon as he stepped into the place, he felt discreet glances, a certain discomfort in the air. Maybe it was just an impression. Maybe he was exaggerating. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that something was wrong. She waited patiently as she watched other customers being served with smiles, while employees approached people who had just entered. But for her, nothing. No approach, no "can I help you?" Just silence. Jasmine tried to get the attention of an attendant, but received a cold and automatic response. Without much interest, the saleswoman pointed to a distant shelf and continued her conversation with another employee. Michael Jordan's daughter didn't want privileges. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted to be treated with respect, like any other customer. But as I continued walking through the store, the feeling of exclusion grew. She picked up a model of sneakers, observed it, looked to the side and saw that, while she was barely noticed, a white couple received attentive service full of smiles. It was at that moment that the penny dropped. It wasn't a coincidence. The humiliation began to take its toll. Jasmine felt her heart speed up. She could just walk away, forget about it, and go on with her day. But no, something inside her said she couldn't let it go. So he took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and made a call. On the other end of the line, his father's voice came firm and direct. What happened? Jasmine reported everything without omitting details. Michael Jordan's silence was absolute. But anyone who knows him knows that his silence is never empty. In a few minutes, the store would receive a visit that no one expected. Now imagine the scene. Michael Jordan, the basketball legend, the man whose name is on millions of products around the world, walking into that store unannounced. It took the employees a few seconds to recognize him, but when they realized who was there, the atmosphere completely changed. Nervous smiles appeared. Surprised looks crossed. The attendant who ignored Jasmine froze. She knew, at that very moment, that she had made a huge mistake. But what Michael Jordan did next, no one expected. Jasmine Jordan grew up surrounded by her father's legacy. Since she was little, she has seen firsthand the impact that the name Jordan had on the world. But, contrary to what many imagine, she never relied solely on that. She always made a point of following her own path, showing that her value went far beyond being Michael Jordan's daughter. His love for basketball was in his blood, but instead of pursuing a career on the court, he found his calling behind the scenes of the sport, working directly with the management and marketing of the Jordan brand. She understood every detail of the sports and fashion universe, knew how the market worked, and above all, knew the importance of a simple pair of sneakers. Since she was a child, Jasmine has been passionate about sneakers. He grew up watching the launches, following the models that bore his father's name, and learning the meaning of each design. For her, sneakers were not just an accessory, but a symbol of culture, representation, and identity. Maybe that's why going into sports stores and choosing a new model has always been one of his little pleasures. Contrary to what many might think, she never insisted on being recognized or treated in a special way. I liked coming in, looking at the models on the shelves, feeling the texture of the fabrics, choosing what I wanted without needing to attract attention. It was a simple experience, but one that had special meaning for her. And that was exactly why the situation inside the store took her by surprise. Jasmine wasn't the type to put herself above others because she was the daughter of a legend. She has always believed that respect should not be a question of status, money, or last name. But there, at that moment, he realized that for some people, the reality was still different. Even without saying a word, he noticed the looks of contempt, the expressions of indifference, and the lack of care. It was as if his presence was not welcome. She wasn't there as Michael Jordan's heir, but rather as a black woman trying to buy sneakers. And apparently, for that employee, that was a problem. For a few seconds, Jasmine tried to ignore it. He took a deep breath and continued analyzing the models as he usually did. But with each movement, the situation became more evident. She took one of the sneakers, held it in her hands, turned to the employee, and asked if she could see another number. The answer came cold and short without the saleswoman even looking at it. "I don't think we have that in stock." Jasmine knew this kind of excuse well. It was the classic way to dismiss a customer without having to send them away directly. Still, he persisted, asking about other models, but received the same empty answer. However, while his request was ignored, another customer walked into the store and, within a matter of seconds, was greeted with a smile and all. Available options. It was at that moment that Jasmine felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't about sneakers. It wasn't about bad service. It was about something much bigger, something that unfortunately many people go through every day. And the worst? This was happening to her, the daughter of the man whose name was printed on almost every product in that store. The name Jordan was one of the most responsible for the success of that brand, and ironically, here was his daughter being treated with total disrespect inside a store that made millions from her father's image. Did this make sense? Now I want to know, have you ever seen a situation like this? Have you ever seen someone treated differently because of the color of their skin or because they don't fit a certain standard? Tell me in the comments what you would do in Jasmine's place. Or, if you agree that respect should come before anything else, comment, "I always respect," to show that situations like this can no longer happen. Jasmine Jordan was still in the store, holding the sneakers in her hands, still trying to understand if what was happening was real. She had been to countless sporting goods stores, but had never experienced such a hostile atmosphere. It wasn't just a grumpy employee or bad service. It was something different, something she knew well, but had never faced so directly. The looks, the contempt, the refusal to offer simple assistance, everything indicated that she was not welcome there. She tried again, approached the counter and politely asked if she could see a different number for that model. The attendant didn't even make eye contact, took a few seconds to respond, and without showing any interest said, "I don't think we have that size." Jasmine noticed the dry tone of the response. The employee didn't even check the system. She didn't bother to check the stock. She simply dismissed your request. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It could just be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But it was enough to look around to understand the situation more clearly. Other customers came in and were promptly served, received smiles, product suggestions, and completely different treatment from what she was receiving. A man entered shortly after her, and in a matter of seconds another attendant came smiling, offering the most expensive models in the store. The difference was stark, impossible to ignore. Jasmine still tried to insist, asking about a different model, but the answer was the same. "Unfortunately, we don't have that one either." The problem is that she knew those sneakers were in stock. "I knew because I followed the launches. I knew because I had seen other people leaving the store with that same model on their feet." The employee simply didn't want to serve her. The discomfort increased with each second. She felt the eyes around her. Some people noticed what was happening. Others pretended not to see. Jasmine held the sneakers for a moment, thought about letting it go, leaving the store and forgetting that moment. But deep down I knew I couldn't do that. How many people had been in that same situation and simply moved on because they had no other option? She couldn't accept that silently. She then asked directly, "Why are you treating me like this?" The attendant hesitated for a moment, surprised by the question, but soon recovered and replied coldly, "I'm not treating you in any way. We just don't have the models you want." Jasmine realized that it was useless to insist. This wasn't a stock issue, it was a respect issue. She took a deep breath, picked up the phone and called someone. What happened after that call would change everything, because on the other end of the line was Michael Jordan, and if there's one thing the whole world knows about him, it's that he doesn't tolerate injustice. The attendant's silence said more than any words. Jasmine was still standing there, holding her sneakers in her hands, while the employee looked away, pretending to be busy, fiddling with something on the counter. There were no more doubts. It wasn't a bad service issue. It wasn't a mistake. She was being ignored on purpose. Discomfort took over the environment, and the feeling that she was not welcome there became even stronger. Meanwhile, the scene next door was completely different. A white customer entered the store and, in a matter of seconds, another attendant ran to greet him. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you? Find something special today?" The tone was completely different, welcoming, helpful. Jasmine watched the scene carefully. He received suggestions for the best models, exclusive offers, VIP treatment without even having to ask. The contrast was stark. She was still trying to understand where this would go. If she asked about a more expensive sneaker, would the answer be the same? Decided to test it. He approached the employee and pointed to one of the premium models displayed on the shelf. One of the most sought-after launches at the moment. "And this one? Do you have them in my size?" The attendant didn't bother to check. He sighed, rolled his eyes almost imperceptibly, and replied dryly, "This model is quite expensive, you know." It was what was missing. Jasmine felt the impact of those words. It wasn't just what she said, but as she said. It was that tone full of assumptions, of judgment. What did she mean by that? Did he think she didn't have the money to pay? Did his appearance not match the type of customer the store wanted to serve? Jasmine tried to maintain her composure, but inside she felt her blood boiling. The employee didn't even realize who was working. Maybe for her, Jasmine was just another young girl, unimportant, not worth the effort. But what the attendant didn't know was that Michael Jordan's daughter grew up hearing stories of struggle, of overcoming, of resilience. She knew she couldn't accept that kind of treatment. But before any reaction, he decided to observe a little more. Would it just be with her? And then once again proof that it was no coincidence. Another customer entered the store, a well-dressed couple. Before they could even ask, they were greeted with smiles, offered exclusive service, and taken directly to the launch area. Meanwhile, Jasmine was still there, being completely ignored, as if she didn't exist. It was at that moment that other people in the store started to notice. Some customers exchanged discreet glances. Some looked away, trying to pretend they didn't see. But the climate had changed. She took a deep breath. I had two options. I could let it go, leave the store, and pretend nothing happened, or I could take action. But Jasmine Jordan wasn't the type to accept this kind of thing quietly. He picked up the phone and made a call. On the other end of the line, Michael Jordan's voice came through steadily. What happened? And from then on, this story would take a turn that no one expected. The atmosphere in the store became even heavier. Jasmine held the phone in her hands, trying to remain calm, but inside she felt a mix of indignation and frustration. Why did that still happen? Why, even though she was the daughter of one of the greatest sports icons, did she still need to deal with this type of situation? She took a deep breath and, before anything else, decided to give the attendant one last chance to correct herself. She approached the counter, looked the employee directly in the eyes, and asked firmly, but without raising her voice, "Why don't you want to answer me?" The woman hesitated. He remained silent for a few seconds, as if he didn't know what to say. Her eyes became restless, showing a certain discomfort, as if she had been caught in the act. He tried to hide it, giving a forced smile. "No, it's not that. It's just that we're really busy right now, and that model you want isn't really available." Jasmine crossed her arms. I knew it was a lie. She had already seen that. Same sneaker being sold there just a few minutes ago, but he decided not to insist. I was already sure what was happening. What was irritating was not just the unequal treatment, but the way the attendant tried to minimize what happened. Jasmine had seen this kind of behavior before. When the prejudice was not direct, it was disguised as excuses, Empty justifications and subtly inferior treatment. She looked around and noticed that some people were watching the scene, but no one was saying anything. As always, silence prevailed in these moments, and it was at that moment that Jasmine made a decision. I wouldn't buy anything. I wouldn't give a dime to that store. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, much less beg for respect. He put the sneakers back on the shelf and, without saying another word, picked up the phone. He dialed a number. The surrounding environment seemed to have turned down the volume. The phone rang twice before the unmistakable voice on the other end answered. "Dad, you won't believe what just happened." Jasmine's expression changed, becoming even more serious. The person on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, listening to every detail. Then, a single sentence was spoken. "I am on my way." The employee had no idea what had just happened, but in just a few minutes, everything inside that store would change completely. And now I want to know, what would you do in Jasmine's place? Have you ever lived or witnessed something similar? Tell me here in the comments. Or if you believe no one should be treated like this, write "always respect" to show that situations like this can no longer be tolerated. On the other end of the line, Michael Jordan listened intently to his daughter's every word. His silence was deep, intense, but anyone who knew him knew what it meant. He was not a man of impulsive reactions. He did not need to raise his voice to demonstrate his indignation. His name, his presence, his story already carried an undeniable weight. But inside him, a revolt grew with every detail Jasmine shared. He knew that racism still existed, but hearing that his own daughter had been humiliated inside a store that made billions at the expense of its brand, its career in sport, was unacceptable. Jasmine, on the other end of the phone, was waiting for an answer. Maybe a "get out of there, let it go." Maybe a "I'll solve this with a connection." But what he heard was something completely different. "I am on my way." Her heart sped up. She knew her father, and knew that when he said something like that, it meant things were going to change. It wouldn't just be an apology. It wouldn't be resolved with a simple conversation. Michael Jordan was not the type of man to accept injustice in silence, and if there was one thing he did better than anyone else, it was turning a moment of humiliation into an act of greatness. Across town, Jordan was already getting into his car. He very well could have resolved everything with a call to the store executives. He could have made a phone call and made sure that employee never worked there again. But no, he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He wanted every person present in that place to understand exactly what had just happened. He wanted to show that respect cannot be bought, but is imposed. As he drove, his mind revisited all the racist situations he had faced throughout his life. From his school days, when they said he would never go far, to his NBA, years where he had to prove countless times that he was much more than just an athlete. But now the target wasn't him, it was his daughter, and that made everything even more personal. The store continued with its normal movement. The employee who had treated Jasmine with indifference did not even imagine that in a few minutes her attitude would have consequences that she could never predict. Customers came and went. Employees talked to each other. Everything seemed to go on like any other day. But what no one knew was that Michael Jordan was already arriving, and when he walked through those doors, everything changed. The store continued with its usual movement. Customers came and went. Employees took orders. Some laughed and talked among themselves, oblivious to what was about to happen. But in the middle of the routine, the manager received a call that made him open his eyes wide and remain completely still for a few seconds. On the other end of the line, the voice of the company's senior management sounded tense and direct. "Michael Jordan is on his way." The shock was immediate. The manager swallowed hard. Had they heard right? Michael Jordan, himself, in their store? That didn't make sense. But before he could process the information, the call ended, and he realized there was no time to think. His mind began to spin. Why would he be coming? What could have happened for a man like Jordan to decide to show up there in person? He looked around, feeling the pressure build in his chest. His eyes scanned the room until they found Jasmine, who was still there, standing, waiting. Outside, without fanfare, without security, without cameras, a black car discreetly stopped in front of the store. The door opened, and before anyone noticed, Michael Jordan entered. The impact was instantaneous. The environment, which seconds before had been noisy and busy, was filled with almost absolute silence. It was as if time had slowed down. Heads began to turn. Eyes crossing in surprise and disbelief. This wasn't just any visitor. That was Michael Jordan, basketball's greatest legend, the man whose name and image were plastered on virtually every high-value product in the store, the owner of a billion-dollar brand, an icon that transcended sport and became a symbol of greatness, success, and respect. The employees were completely paralyzed. No one knew exactly how to react. Some murmured, trying to confirm if it was really him. The manager straightened up, quickly trying to appear confident, but his nervousness was evident. Customers looked on without understanding. Some even took out their cell phones to try to record the moment. But those who most felt the impact of Jordan's arrival were the attendant who had mistreated Jasmine. Her face turned pale. The gaze was lost on the floor. His hands started to sweat. She knew something was wrong, that this wasn't just a casual visit. It was him, and he was there for a reason. Jasmine maintained her posture, calmly observing everyone's reaction when they saw her father enter. She knew he wouldn't need to raise his voice, wouldn't need to demand anything. His presence alone was a shock to anyone who understood the gravity of the situation. The silence was broken when Jordan walked down the store's aisle, taking his time but with a firm stance. The employees looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The manager quickly rushed to meet him, but Jordan didn't even look at him. His eyes were only focused on one thing, her attendant, and it was at that moment that she realized that everything was about to change. The silence inside the store was almost suffocating. All eyes were on Michael Jordan, who remained standing in the center of the room, without needing to say a single word to command respect. His presence was imposing, his expression serious. He didn't show anger, but he carried something even more powerful in his eyes, a weight that the attendant felt at the time. His eyes wavered, his breathing became shallow, and his mind desperately tried to find a way to escape the situation, but there was no escape. Jordan walked slowly toward the counter, each step echoing in the absolute silence. The employee lowered her head, avoiding eye contact while the store manager hurriedly approached, trying to remedy the situation. "Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry. There was a misunderstanding. We can resolve it." But he didn't even look at the manager. His eyes were fixed on the attendant. And then, with a firm voice but without the need to raise the tone, he asked, "Do you know who you just treated with contempt?" The employee tried to respond but stuttered. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The weight of that question was too great. It didn't matter whether or not she knew who Jasmine was. The real question was, why had she treated someone like that? Jordan continued, "If my daughter was just any young girl, would it make a difference? Or would you treat her the same?" "Why?" The impact was devastating. The entire store watched without breathing. The attendant looked at the manager, looking for some way out, but he himself didn't know what to do. Everyone knew that a simple apology would not be enough. Jasmine, beside her father, maintained her posture. She didn't need to say anything. His look said it all. She grew up learning that respect should be non-negotiable, and here was proof that some people still needed to learn that lesson. The employee finally managed to mumble something. I didn't mean to," but Jordan interrupted her. "Didn't you want to, or think you could treat someone differently because you thought they didn't belong here?" The sentence cut through the room like a blade. Everyone understood what was being said there. That situation wasn't just about Jasmine. It was about all the people who have ever been treated like this, ignored, humiliated, made invisible simply because of who they are. Michael Jordan wasn't there for revenge. I didn't want screams. I didn't want exaggerated punishments. He wanted something bigger, a lesson. He turned to the manager and said, in a tone that made it clear that this was not a request, but a decision, "If your store truly represents my brand, then this culture needs to change. What happened here today can no longer happen to anyone." And at that moment it became clear that that store would never be the same after that. Now I want to know, do you think the attendant deserved a second chance, or should she pay for the consequences? Comment your opinion below. And if you believe that respect comes before everything, write "always respect" in the comments to show that this type of situation can no longer be tolerated. The impact of Michael Jordan's words was instantaneous. The silence in the store continued, but now it carried a completely different weight. The manager, still nervous, looked at the floor without knowing how to react. The employee who ignored and humiliated Jasmine felt everyone's eyes on her. There was no excuse that could fix what had happened, but most of all, Michael Jordan didn't want a simple retraction. He wasn't there for an empty, meaningless apology. He wanted something much bigger, The store owner, who had not been present until then, arrived hurriedly after being informed of what was happening. As soon as he saw Jordan standing there, serious and imposing, he felt the weight of the situation. He knew that if he didn't do it, the store's name would be all over the news for the worst reasons. Without hesitation, he approached Michael Jordan, extended his hand and, in a trembling voice, said, "Mr. Jordan, on behalf of our store, I apologize for what happened. This does not represent our company values." But Jordan didn't move a muscle. He didn't shake the businessman's hand. He wasn't there for empty words. "Are you apologizing because you truly understand what happened, or because you realize it could hurt your store?" The question made the store owner lose his breath for a second. He tried to argue, but Jordan continued, "Words don't change anything if attitudes remain the same." And that was when the moment came that would change everything. Michael Jordan demanded concrete actions. He didn't just want that employee to learn a lesson, he wanted the entire store to be transformed. If your store truly wants to represent the Jordan brand, then you need to make sure this never happens to anyone again. From that moment on, real changes began to happen. The store announced a new training program for all employees, focused on raising awareness against discrimination and prejudice. Furthermore, the company took an even bigger step. It made a $1 million donation to an institution that fights racism and promotes social equality. Michael Jordan's name would not be associated with a place where prejudice was tolerated. But what no one expected was the impact this story would have outside that store. The event was recorded by some customers, and within a few hours the video of Jordan's arrival went viral around the world. Millions of people commented, shared, and praised his stance. Jasmine Jordan's name ended up in trending topics on social media, with thousands of people recognizing her courage for not remaining silent in the face of injustice. The media began covering the case, and the store's name was exposed to the entire world. But this time, it wasn't to promote a launch or a marketing campaign. It was to talk about a mistake that could not be repeated. The impact was so great that other companies began reviewing their own policies, fearing they were making the same mistakes. Michael Jordan not only secured justice for his daughter, but he also left an even greater legacy. He showed that true power is not in money or fame, but in the ability to make a difference. The impact of this story went far beyond that store. What began as an act of prejudice turned into a lesson that the entire world could watch. Michael Jordan once again showed that his greatness is not just in what he did on the court, but in the way he uses his voice to fight for respect, dignity, and justice. Your daughter could have left quietly, she could have ignored it, but she decided to act. And thanks to that, real change happened. But this story isn't just about Jasmine, nor about Michael Jordan. It's about all the people who have ever been ignored, humiliated, and treated with contempt just for being who they are. Racism still exists, and moments like this happen every day, away from the cameras, without anyone doing anything. How many times have you seen something like this happen? How many times have you remained silent, not knowing how to act? The truth is that change begins when we decide to no longer accept this type of situation. Michael Jordan didn't use his fame to demand privileges. He used his voice to ensure no one else went through what his daughter went through. Because respect is not a favor, it's a right. And now I want to know, if it were you in Jasmine's place, what would you have done? Have you ever lived or witnessed something similar? Comment your experience here. If you believe that no one should be treated differently because of the color of their skin, financial status, or appearance, write "always respect" in the comments to show that this fight continues. But if you think this story was exciting, wait until you see what Michael Jordan did for a boy who dreamed of meeting him. This boy lived in a humble community and was passionate about basketball. His biggest dream was to have an original Jordan sneaker or shirt, but his reality was different. One day he got a shirt, but it was counterfeit. His friends made fun of him, saying that he would never be able to see his idol up close, that it was a waste of time to dream about something like that. But this boy believed in miracles. What he didn't know was that fate was about to surprise him, because somehow his story reached Michael Jordan. And when that happened, this boy's life changed forever. If you want to see this exciting moment, click on the next video and discover how Jordan turned a discredited dream into one of the most memorable stories of his career. I guarantee you won't be able to hold back the tears.